Welcome to a special feature video. Today I'm interviewing David Nicholas, an Australian producer and engineer heavyweight. David's openness and approachability, his sense of humour and humility, as well as his technical knowledge has seen him working at the highest level with artists both locally here in Australia and internationally, including INXS, Jimmy Barnes, Johnny Diesel, Midnight Oil, Richard Clapton, GANGgajang, Australian Crawl, George, Katie Noonan, the Whitlams, the Baby Animals, Delta Goodrem, Damien Leith, internationally with Elton John, Pulp, Johnny and David Hallyday, Rod Stewart, Sting and Bryan Adams. David is someone I've had the fortune to work with on both sides of the glass, and I'm honoured to also have him as a friend. David, thanks for taking the time to chat with me.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Tell us about some of your current music projects.
Currently I'm mixing some stuff for Desert Pea Media, which is a group of people that go out to Indigenous Aboriginal communities and work with all the young kids and do hip-hop stuff, and and they bring it back here and I mix it and we do videos. They do videos, and it's all about trying to empower young Aboriginal kids to sort of have a future and respect their culture, and it's very worthwhile. I love doing it, and I'm also working with a guy from Melbourne called Beck and Sebastian, who I had signed to my label when I was with Jellyfish. He's a great songwriter, and they've just now reformed. He was a solo act then, but he's now reformed, and so I'm doing some songs with them, trying to get them a deal. So I'm doing that. Just finished the Baby Animals DVD for the end of their tour for the album we did, which is fantastic. Best fun you can have with your clothes on. Just mixing away. I mixed my son's album, actually. He's got his own hip-hop band, so I mixed that as well. So, cool. A lot of stuff, a lot of cool stuff.
Are you mixing in the box a lot these days?
All that hip-hop stuff I am, because it's kind of all comes from sample-based stuff generally anyway, and so it doesn't really matter. But any of the album stuff, like all of the Baby Animals stuff and all the jazz stuff I do, which is another thing I've just finished, another jazz record, I do analog, go down to Sing Sing in Melbourne and do it down there.
So you're the co-founder of a project in Philly called Live Work Loud, which involves an apartment block that has a living space above a recording studio, so that musicians can record, eat and sleep in the same building. And from the pictures I've seen, it looks stunning. What inspired it? And I understand you designed the studio.
I'm helping with my partner in crime over there, Paula Jones, who's now Paula Hansen, and her husband Ringo. She was toying with an idea of doing a couple of these spaces, and then once we started working on the project, we discovered that economies of scales meant it was much better for us to build a larger building. So we've now teamed up with a few other people like SSL and Source Connect and some other companies like that who are very interested in combining all of this technology into one space where connectivity and networking will become crucial, and that you can have a professional space within your living space. Like all of us, we're having to now work at home because all the major studios are kind of going under and there aren't the budgets for that anymore. But the problem everybody's finding is that it's pretty hard to convert your house into a studio. You get kids come and yell at you at 6 o'clock to shut up, stop playing the same chorus over and over again, and the neighbours don't really appreciate it at 2 in the morning. It's pretty hard to design an acoustic space that you can, within an existing facility, and especially in places like America and Europe, where generally you're renting rather than owning. So, landlords don't like you building studio walls inside your apartment blocks. Anyway, all this sort of stuff led to the fact that it's fairly impractical. When you're mixing at home, having a client come and have to wander through your house, it's not exactly the ideal situation. Yeah. So we thought that, there is places like Philly where they've got giant, well-built, huge buildings that they really want to invest in and stop becoming slums. And they're built like, they're factories. So they got, 4-foot slabs and stuff like that. So they're ideal for what the kind of thing we're talking about. Yeah, so the idea is to have them split so that you live on all the apartments are on one level and all the studios are on another level, but they're joined together with a spiral staircase from the apartment so that you can, walk downstairs in your undies at 2 a.m. and continue with your mix. But you can have a professional entrance for your clients to come into your studio. And also the other really big thing about what we're trying to do with it is reintroduce networking, where there'll be a whole bunch of people in the industry all living in the same space, so which is one of the really big problems with the demise of all the big studios. It's a community, and most of your work as a producer and engineer comes from being in a studio and bumping into people, or there's another band working in the studio next door. That's all gone now. We're all sitting at home in our little studios waiting for the phone to ring. And so that whole networking thing has just gone out the window. And that is really probably the biggest change that's affected how we work as far as communicate with each other. I mean, it's a fairly gregarious community, the music community, and now we're all sort of thrown to the four corners and everybody's in their little rooms, and it's not only lonely, boring, you're not making the connections you used to make. So this will be a building which will have video people, gaming people, music people, producer people, everybody all in the same building while still living at home and still working in their, in a cost-effective environment. And what we're doing is we're designing just a very nice acoustically designed space with a booth and putting in all of the interconnection from there to the rest of the world and to the rest of the building, and then people can just deck them out with whatever they want to deck out. We're also going to, acquire an enormous amount of outboard gear and microphones and stuff like that, which a lot of people don't often need. Like they don't have the need to buy a $15,000 mic because they might only use it once a month. Most of the time they're mixing or whatever. So we will have a whole pile of this stuff that people can rent from us within the building. So they've got access to lots of great gear and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, it's going to be really fun. And we spent about 2 years working on it so far and, finding ways to fund it. I haven't met a single person who doesn't go, shit, I would love to be there. So, we're hoping to get it up this year. We're going to be doing a big showcase in April this year, I think, where we're going to be having a drummer in London playing with a band in Philly, all using high-speed internet connections, and it's going to be great. It's going to be really good, and we're very excited about it. And we see it as the future for professional musicians, producers, and engineers.
That sounds great. In addition to this project, you're doing a little bit of live sound as well as your production work, your engineering work. You're designing your own hardware channel strip. With so many projects on the go, would you say that it's safe to assume that diversity is the key in terms of surviving in the music industry?
It certainly is in Australia, that's for sure. The music business is much smaller than it used to be. But, I think it also keeps you fresh. I mean, I really enjoyed going back to doing front of house. I think that was a really fun thing to do. All the technology had changed. When I did it last, it was all analog. Now it's all digital technology with these digital multi-cores and all that kind of stuff, and fantastic multi-array speakers. And the technology in the live industry is amazing now. So it was great fun to go back and learn all that sort of stuff. And, I was using the D show, which is basically a Pro Tools rig you take to a gig, That was kind of fun. So, it was really good. And, the whole thing about all these other projects are things just to keep you fresh, And also it's a way of, as I say, the ability to just still keep meeting people, because rather than just sitting in your studio at home, networking is everything. Almost everything I've done, all my work has come from bumping into people at the studio, or working in the studio next door to somebody, or working with a band live, or, in a gig or something like that. So networking is crucial.
How do you split your time between all these projects?
I don't like sleeping very much. It's a waste of time. I'll have plenty of time for that later. No, there's always time. I mean, anybody who makes records knows that when you own a record, there is nothing but the record. But then in between the record, there's always plenty of free time. And records used to take 3 months. Now you're sort of doing records in, 6 weeks. So the time frame to do records is shortened enormously. So even if you did have the same number of records in a year, it would probably be about half as much time as you had before. So there's plenty of time. There's plenty of time. I'll sleep later.
I understand you began your music career as a bass player, which quickly moved into designing a studio with your mates, and then beginning your career as a sound engineer. Tell us about some of your experiences on the road to becoming an engineer.
Okay. Well, I like every 14-year-old, I wanted to be a rock star, so I was playing in bands at school and, going out and touring around locally. I grew up in country Australia, and we used to do all the supports for the local band, for the bands that used to come through town and all that kind of stuff. And, I was hooked by the bug from the first gig. That was it. That's what I was going to do. So school was really just a matter of marking time until I could be let free. So, yeah, I loved it. Then the lighting guy for my band had a rehearsal studio with a little 4-track in it, and we used to do demos to people there. But that got forced to be closed. A whole bunch of us got together and started building a new studio, and we just got a bit carried away and ended up building something much bigger and better than we realised until it was finished. And then we managed to raise the money to buy the very first SSL into Australia, and at that stage I was still playing in bands and doing gigs around Sydney while we were building the studio. But then once we borrowed the money for the SSL, the sort of hammer came down, and I was told that no, buddy, concentrate on paying for this bloody thing. So they gave up playing and started making records. And then from the first time I made a record, it was like, that was another golden moment, like the first time I did a gig where I just went, oh, now this is it. Because what used to drive me nuts about playing in bands was that you played the same songs for such a long time. Whereas when you're working on a record, every time you worked, every 6 weeks, it was a whole new bunch of people and a whole new bunch of songs. And and that was like, oh my God, this is fantastic because, oh my God, I said, oh my God. Having teenage kids, it rubs off. But it was a magic, it was a sort of penny dropping moment where I just went, this is what's been driving me nuts about playing in the band, was just being stuck playing the same material and how hard it was to move on. And this way, when you're making records, it's just start again with a whole new bunch of stuff, and it was fantastic. And so I was hooked and never looked back. And because we had the first SSL and we'd actually physically built the studio, we were the only people that knew how to run it. So I just sort of ended up becoming the house engineer. Me and another guy called Al Wright became the house engineers, and Andrew Scott, who was my partner in building the studio. Because we had the only SSL, we had Claire Mountain come out, we had Nick Launay come out, we had Warren Livesey come out, we had Chris Kimsey come out, all major players of music in the 70s and 80s. And assisting and engineering for them was the best school you could go to. Just watched everything was going on and absorbed as much as we could. And it was just a very fun thing to be working on new music all the time. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And if you love something, it's not that hard, What
were some of the difficulties you faced coming up through the ranks, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I suppose the only difficulty was trying to pretend that I knew what I was doing before I did know what I was doing. I avoided the question of, so what records have you done before, for quite some time, by going, look, there's a bird or a plane or something, until I'd done enough to be able to actually say I'd done a few records. But the first record I ever did was the first record I ever did. I went from playing in a band. I think I did a 4-track demo to doing Shabu Shabal, which was a full-blown proper record. So it was really flying by the seat of our pants. But that was exciting. I mean, that's what I've done my whole life is, show me the deep end and I'm in there. I think that's the only way you learn. I like pressure, and I think it makes you perform at your best. Being able to work under pressure has meant that I've ended up working with people that a lot of other people weren't given the opportunity to work with because other people found them difficult, whereas I didn't find them difficult. They just didn't suffer fools very well. And I find that is great. It doesn't bother me at all. I don't suffer fools very well either. And I think if you're not giving it 100%, then you shouldn't be doing it. Because the one thing you want to do when you're making a record is keep the flow and the process and everything going and it being as invisible as possible and trying to be one step ahead of the game when you're working as an engineer for somebody. And they really appreciate it. And, so I never had a problem with these people that other people found difficult. And it's the same thing that happened recently when I went back to working in the live at the convention centre in Sydney. I came back from London and I was, trying to get work. And the first job was working with a guy that nobody else wanted to work with because everybody said he was a pain in the ass. But he wasn't. He just didn't tolerate idiots. He's the guy who I'm now actually working with to design this protocol.
Right. Yeah, the new hardware.
Yeah. So we struck up a great friendship. It was like me and Chris Thomas. I mean, people often said he was really difficult, but I worked with him for 8 years and never had a problem.
This studio brought about big bands in the shape of INXS and Midnight Oil and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, it was because we had the SSL, and we had. I mean, our studio. We built it without knowing anything about building a studio. Like, we were musicians, and so we built somewhere that we thought would be what would be great to be a studio. So we were the first ones to have really big windows and everyone could see everywhere, and the rooms were big. We were like 4 times as big as anybody else's rooms. So nice, huge, big control room, and we went with this brand new philosophy, which was called Live End Dead End, which we only read about Andy read about in some magazine, and somebody in London had built one because it was everybody else's studios before that were built by this company called Westlake, which were a very shallow control rooms with a lot of concrete and rocks at the front and very, very harsh and horrible spaces, really. So we went with the other way around, where the front is completely dead and the back is alive, and you have a big back space so that it's a comfortable environment to sit in. And because the front is dead, you don't have any reflection, so all you're listening to is the speakers. So we had a lot of interest from overseas in our studio because we were the only people. There was only about 4 or 5 LED studios in the world, and we had the only SSL in Australia. So we ended up getting the overseas guys wanted to work in our studio. By default, we got to work with great bands and the great producers, and so and also we changed the way studios were rented in Australia. We were the first studio to do lockouts, where everybody else was locked into renting out the studio a couple of days a week to an advertising company or something, and they charge you for every box you used. If you used this box, they charge you an extra bit of money. We went, if you rent the studio, you rent it by the week or by the month or by the day, and whatever's in the building, you can use whatever you want. So we changed the whole philosophy of the way studios were rented, so people knew what they were going to spend before they went in the studio, and they didn't get some horrible bill shock at the end.
So they used to charge. They used to charge for each unit, like
using
a compressor or something.
If you used extra bits of gear or stuff like that, and they used to charge by the hour. Nobody charged by the day or the week or the month because they couldn't, because they rented out certain days of the week to an advertising company or somebody like that. Where we went, no, we just want to make records, and if you want to book the studio for a month, you can book the studio for a month. Go sick. And basically, once you've rented it, you can do whatever you want 24/7, and the place is yours, and whatever's in it, you can use. And that was a completely new philosophy, and nobody was doing that. All the bands loved it, and the record companies loved it because they knew, okay, well, I can budget this amount of money, that's how much it's going to cost me, and that's it. And that was it. And the only thing that ever changed was the tape budget.
So how did the success of the bands change your career prospects, obviously, by being in that location and having all awesome bands come in?
Just through what I was talking about with what we're trying to do with Live Work Loud, it was about the networking. That's probably the biggest thing there. That's how I met. I did my first record with INXS was with a producer called Mark Opitz, and I kind of co-engineered it with Andrew Scott because we were just starting out, and so I did some of the recording part of it, and he did some of the mixing part of it. But then the band really got on with me, and then they did a record with Chris Thomas and a different engineer, and they really got on with Chris, and they thought, well, let's put Dave and Chris together for the next one, and that was Kick. So that's how these things kind of work through the networking, which is kind of gone now. Networking thing that happened from working with these bands is what helped my career enormously, because I ended up going to London working with Chris Thomas for 8 years, and I ended up doing records for Chris Kimsey in between when Chris wasn't working, because I'd met him in London, in Australia, when he was doing Noiseworks album, when he came into the Noiseworks album. So, yeah, that helped me a lot, just through meeting people more than anything else.
And so that led to working with Elton John?
That was my first big overseas gig, first big gig really, I suppose, as a hired gun engineer. And I remember sitting on the plane flying to Denmark thinking, how the hell did I get here? And I was shitting myself, I tell you. I mean, I grew up in Canberra, in a little country town in Canberra in Australia, and flying to Denmark, of all bloody places, to do a record with Elton John, with a producer who mixed the record that made me want to make records, play music, which was Dark Side of the Moon.
Oh, wow.
So it was just surreal, totally surreal, and terrifying and all those sort of things.
What was it like working for Elton John?
Oh, it's fantastic. He's probably one of the most talented, funniest, hardworking people I've ever met. He's absolutely unbelievably nice guy, unbelievably, super funny. He never stopped laughing the whole time, and incredibly smart. I mean, he's a genius. He's got total recall. He never writes anything down. He can remember everything he's ever written. I saw him write 3 songs in 20 minutes, sing them, and he doesn't have to write anything down. He can remember them. That's it. He can remember everything he's ever done.
That's amazing.
And by 8 o'clock in the morning, he will have read all of the broadsheet papers that he would have had delivered to the studio, done all the crosswords, phoned everybody, got all the goss. He was just nuts. And incredibly funny. And he was whenever we were in the studio, he was in the studio. We started at, 10 o'clock, finished at 8:30, worked flat out, and then it was, it was great. It was extremely, extremely exciting.
So having watched you work in the studio, I understand you place an emphasis on getting the mic placement correct and getting the sound at the source. Could you expand on the importance of getting the sound right at the source for the benefit of our audience? The positive implications of this approach as opposed to fixing it later in the mix, which we can do endlessly these days?
I suppose for me, it was always just seemed to be a completely natural thing to do. I mean, when you're working with great players, they have a great sound, and the thing was to try and get that sound onto your tape. And if you got great players, you got a great sound, and so it was about trying to not fuck it up. And so that was the main criteria, was to try and not change their sound that they had. Using the right mics for the right gear, and also learning that, you can move a microphone an inch, and that gives you all the top end that you're missing, all the bottom end you're missing, and that's far better than EQing it, because it doesn't as soon as you start EQing it, you start putting phase shifting into it and all that sort of stuff. So, if you just move the mic a little bit, it sounds much better. If you haven't had to add it in the EQ, and it's a truer sound, and it's a more solid sound because it's not got phase shifting going on in it because of the equalizer. So I was very fortunate to work with really good people when I began, and that's how they all did it, and that's how it seemed like to be a perfectly logical thing to do. When I started, it was tape, and you had 20 odd tracks or 16 tracks or things like that. So you always had to record everything live. And people reacted to what they were hearing. So there was no fixing it afterwards anyway, because they were actually playing to what they were hearing and reacting to that musically and emotionally. And so if it sounded good, they played better and had more fun, and the record sounded better. And the concept of fixing it later, it is a kind of joke, really, whereas the final thing is, don't worry, we'll fix it in retail, you try and get it right at the beginning. You try and get the sounds right. You try and get the song right. You try and get the mood right. You try and get all those things right at the beginning and then capture that on tape or on a hard disk as you do now. But that's should be your goal, really. The only time you use stuff after the fact, really, is if you want to change something radically from the way it first went down. If you have this song's not working for some reason, maybe if we tried something out of the box or something to muck it up some way, to breathe some life into a song or something like that. So, the only time you do that is if you're struggling really with a song. And maybe you're approaching the song in the wrong way, and if you try something different, it might help. But really, normally it's about just trying to, if you got great players, they have a great sound. And that's one of the fundamental lessons I learned very early on, was that, really great players, all the sound comes from their hands. And all you've got to do is put the right microphone in front of it and not make sure it doesn't overload anything. And that's what, it'll sound great.
Yeah.
I've had the same kit, the same mics, and you put the drum tech playing the drums on it, and then the real drummer comes in and sits down, and it's chalk and cheese. You go, it's like one of that sounds like the drum tech, and the other one sounds like a motherfucker drummer. So, and you haven't done anything. Or, and same with guitars. I mean, great guitar players, the sound just oozes out of their hands, and doesn't matter what you do. If you got a bad guitar player, it sounds crap, and it doesn't matter what you do; it'll always sound crap. But if you got a great one, all you got to do is not try and fuck it up. I'm very fanatical about making sure everything is correct, so that when you press record, and that was one of the things with working with people like Elton and stuff like that, is they expect it all to be working first time. Because they value their performances. And I think it's one of the things that has been lost with the ability to be able to record endlessly. They only expect to be able to sing it once or twice. Or, Jonathan Moffat playing the drums, he only plays one take. And also I do a lot of jazz stuff where, it's a performance that might go for an hour, and you got to make sure everything's right. So I'm very fanatical about making sure everything's working and right and correct, and it's going to have enough headroom, and tested everything. And rather than trying to EQ stuff, moving a mic a tiny little bit makes all the difference. And all those sort of things, so that when you press record and somebody's playing, then you're going to capture it, and there's not going to be a problem. And I think I try and still now try and record, when I record bands and produce bands, try to get them to value their performances. Don't go, well, it's all right, we'll do 40 takes and comp it later. And I think this whole Pro Tools thing has really changed that philosophy in a lot of people, and a lot of young guys who never grew up with tape, where the decision to go over something was irrevocable. If you went over that solo was gone forever. There was no, we'll just go back to the one we had before, Apple Z. It was gone. So it was a different sort of philosophy, and so I try and instill that in people now, because I think it makes people play better if they value their performance more, and if they see you valuing it more by making sure that there's never a situation where you go, oh, can we do that again? It went into the red, or, oh, sorry, we didn't record, or, fuck that. The people I was working with in the early days, they just wasn't an option. And that's why I got those sort of gigs, because I was very particular about making sure everything was working and right. And I don't think I ever had any of those situations. And I loved that, because that pushes you and your abilities, and they really respect and are grateful for you valuing what their work is as well. I mean, if some engineer goes, oh yeah, sorry, I have to do it again because I didn't have it plugged in right, it means you're not giving them the respect that they deserve for their performance. So I think it's a two-way street, and that's what I enjoyed with working with people like that, because they do really appreciate it that somebody else also is trying to, on the other side of the glass, is trying to give it as much as they're trying to give it. In a long way around, that's my answer to that question.
On the INXS track Need You Tonight, could you explain the philosophy about you had an XY setup with matched mics on Michael's voice?
Yeah, on Michael's vocal. Yeah, I can't remember who came up with the idea. It could have been any of us, but at some point there was, the idea to, I have my memory seems to think it was either Chris or Michael said they wanted it to be really close and intimate. I just thought about using a stereo pair, and I just got a pair of 451s and set them up in an XY like this and put a pop filter in front of them, and then that was kind of cool because Michael couldn't hear the stereo image in his head, so it was very sort of intimate already. But it was very uncolored. 451s are brutally uncolored microphones. So I took the split of the microphones and ran them through the Yamaha
Rev 7.
Rev 7. Yeah, that's it. The Yamaha Rev 7, and had it on phase and just put that up in equal level to the stereo mics. So there was 4 channels for the vocal, and we ran that off the tape. So it was post tape into the Yamaha and then backing. So we were only recording 2 tracks when we were recording the takes, but we only did like maybe 3 or 4 takes. And then when we comped it, we printed so we were always hearing it with the phase when we were comping the vocal. And then once we'd finished comping the vocal, we printed it, and then that was it. And the vocal was the 4 tracks. But it was great, and it just has got that incredible closeness, and it was adding the phase which made all the difference, and because it just colored the microphones. The problem with the 451, so they were just too brutally uncolored.
Okay, so that's the only reason why you use the phase option on the Rev 7.
Yeah, it just gave it a bit of more of a special sound. It was just, the 451s were just too brutally honest, and it didn't really have anything special about it. So the phasing gave it something sort of little special thing. And I know when Claire Mountain tried to mix it, he tried to recreate the phasing thing with a higher end box, and it didn't work at all. And they went back and recalled the sound that I had from Sydney, because it was actually printed anyway. So they just used that original sound, and that's where that vocal sound comes from. It's straight off the tape as it was in Sydney, because it wasn't about trying to use a piece of high-end gear or anything. It was just something that worked. That little combination of things really worked, and Michael could hear it in his cans when he was doing it, and he really worked it. And my favourite little bit is the little "come over here" the very beginning. That's that sound. And that's where it starts, and it sort of draws you right in straight away.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love it, and that was just a one-off, and I've out of respect, I've never used it on anybody else ever.
You've mentioned to me before about using compression. I think you said it's the most musical thing, musical tool.
Compression is your friend.
Compression is your friend, that's right, yeah. What do you admire so much about compression for its musicality?
Well, I think, it's funny because when I first started making records, we used tape, and nobody had any idea really how much compression tape was doing to what they were doing. Like, you never would have even thought about compressing guitars or drums to tape ever. You'd like, excuse me? You just wouldn't do it. You might do it with ambience mics or something like that, but, or if you wanted some, but you just didn't do it. And then once tape went away and people were recording digitally, it was just shocking to realize how much the compression was actually doing. And that's why people love tape, because it was just pulled everything in, and it was very musical, but it was unbelievable amount of compression. when you tried to recreate that amount of compression with a piece of output gear now, you just can't believe how much it actually you have to do to make it have the same effect. And the thing is that you need to keep reducing the dynamic range over and over and over again as you go through the process and add more things into the music so that you can hear it all.
Yeah.
But compression, it's all about the attack and release, and compression adds the groove, helps the groove. It really makes everything sit together. So yeah, I find it as a tremendously musical tool to make everything bounce and sit in the groove and swing a bit more and just give it solidness. I use it all the time, and I use it heavily. I mean, now I compress everything. I compress the drums, just about all the drums now, but I never did that before. Just wouldn't even considered it before.
Yeah.
And that's why people love tape so much, because that's what it does. It's 24 fantastic compressors. And the thing about tape is it's frequency dependent compression. You know what I mean? It's actually, it'll compress different frequencies at different levels. And that was one of the things that made it so musical, and that's what is hard to get out of compressors now, is unless you use side chains and things like that, then they limit everything the same. Equalize to them so that they do the same thing that tape used to do, which is affect different frequencies at different levels.
Okay.
And so that's the philosophy behind that. I very rarely use EQ afterwards. I might use it afterwards if I've extremely limited something and need to put a bit of top end back on it or something like that.
When would you boost an EQ before the compressor?
Oh, like with a kick drum or something like that. I don't want it to be pulled in by the beater, the top end of the beater. I want it to be pulled in by the low end, so I can get a bit more length out of the note. And guitars too. Like, you might really want to get a guitar to sort of bite at a particular frequency. You don't want it to be pulled in by the low end, the sort of rumbling and stuff. So you try and get rid of all that shit. You EQ it so that to the point where the limiter's reacting to the frequencies you want it to react to.
Everyone I've spoken to or seen interviewed has said how important it is to study and learn from listening to all the great recordings, but they rarely state how to study the great recordings. What are some techniques you could offer for helping us train our ears and get the most out of the listening experience?
Well, I think that's a funny, for me, that's a funny response, is to listen to great records, because especially nowadays, I mean, all of the great records, or a lot of the great records that these people might be talking about, were recorded live onto tape or something like that through limited gear with, maybe a plate or something like that. So, I think what the real thing is, what you should really be listening to is what makes that, why is that a great record? And the reason why it's a great record is because it's great songs with great performances, and they've been captured. So what you should learn from those records is that's what you should be focusing on, is the quality of the songs and the capturing the great performances, and that's what makes a great record. Records that if you put them up on the big speakers now, don't sound anything like they sound in your head. From when you heard them when you were 18 and whatever, but they don't. You put them up against modern records and they you wouldn't get them past the A&R guy, because they're not listening to the fucking songs half the time anyway. So because they're the sound, but what made them great records is the songs and the performances, and most of those were done live. And for me, that's one of them, overarching things that makes a great record, is trying to capture musicians interacting and playing live. I never build tracks up. I always try and get as many people in the studio at the same time playing together, and that's what makes that's where you get the magic, and that's where you get the great, and that's, and you can have 3 takes of the same song and not touch the faders and play them back. There's so much difference in the way people play that they find it hard to accept that you haven't done anything to the different takes. And And so that's a really good way of sort of showing that it's about the take and
it's capturing that
magic,
performance, yeah.
capturing the performance, and then that's what makes it great.
Could you maybe list some of your favourite recordings?
Well, my most favourite record probably was Dark Side of the Moon. It really changed excited me and made me want to make records. And also records like I loved early Led Zeppelin records, When the Levee Breaks. I loved Neil Young records. I loved Little Feat, Feet Don't Fail Me Now, records like that. And that was all because they were just fantastic performances. And when I first started, I was a bit of a fusion nut and, was into Cream and Bill Bruford and John Wetton. It was like, that was when I went, no, there's songs are what I really love. I mean, I lost my I want to be able to play 1,000 notes, like these guys and wiggly stuff, and just went, what I really like about music is songs that make me feel something and music that makes me feel something. Records that had great songs on them.
What are some of the ways you approach recording musicians in the same space where mic bleed is rampant?
I mean, I suppose the main thing I worry about is phase issues. If I'm in a small space, I make sure things are fairly close together so that if there is bleed, it's close, so you don't have things, delay issues, stuff like that. Especially with these jazz records where you've got like 9 people all playing different instruments and all, it's one take stuff. So I make sure that it's sort of fairly intimate, and I make sure that everything's fairly phase coherent, so you can put up all the mics and everything sort of sounds all right, and you haven't got those sort of issues. So, I always think about it, even if I'm not mixing it. I never record stuff with the mindset that I don't really care. Somebody else is going to mix this; they can fucking deal with it later. I always try and record it so that it's as phase coherent and as clean as possible. But, a lot of times, because I like recording things live as much as possible, then there is always bits of spill from other things. And the thing I always remember there is you just try and keep things close together so that there's not too much, there's not going to be a time delay between things if it does bleed.
What are some common mistakes people are making with home recordings? You obviously, you might get a few of them to mix.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the most common things I find now is that with a lot of people doing stuff on Logic, where they just layer up endlessly, and I used to complain about people sending me stuff with 4 snare drums. Now I actually had the guy send me something with 12 snare drums, and so he's completely taken the cake. And it's because there's no dynamics built into the music because it's not actually being played. It's just being manufactured. So the same dynamic that you get by a drummer just kicking into the chorus, instead they layer up 12 snare drums to make it bigger. And also just the fact that there's endless tracks. So people tend to not be, they don't think about it and they just overdo it. And, because they can. I think having a track limit is really good, and that was one of the great things. One of the great things about tape, even when you had 2 machines, you were still limited to like 48 tracks, was probably as many as you ever had going. And that was good. It meant that you had to be thoughtful about what you're recording. Whereas now, you get some stuff and there might be, 60 tracks and half of them are superfluous. So I think that's probably the biggest trap, is just overdoing it and not thinking about it because they're not in a position where they have to think about it.
How important are recording levels when you're hitting the AD converters in Pro Tools?
Well, I found that I record everything quite low. I know a lot of people got into this thing of slamming them. I'm not really sure what that's about. Digital distortion is pretty horrible, if you ask me. I know it kind of, with some of the real pop stuff, it kind of gives it that edgy sort of sound that they like because it sort of makes it bite or something. I'm not really sure. I don't really get it. I always record very low level, never overload the buses. I find it sounds better. Well, to my ears, it sounds better.
Yeah.
I have a lot of head. I always leave myself plenty of headroom. Um, and yeah, I hate digital distortion. It sounds horrible to me. It's not musical at all. It's just square wave.
We may have covered this already. What are some of the most important lessons you've learned about engineering?
You know, if something's not sounding right, then you have to go to the source. You've either got the wrong mic or the piece of gear, your recording isn't right. I mean, I've seen situations where people will just put up a mic and start EQing it straight away without even walking out of the studio, getting out of their chair and walking out of the studio and listening to what it sounds like in the room and going, oh, it sounds like shit. And then, and fixing it there. So the most important lesson is to fix it at the source. And then make sure you got the right mic on it. And it should sound okay with the right mic without having to do anything to it. You know, if you've got a nice preamp and a decent signal path, it should sound like the sound that they're trying to give you from out there. And if it doesn't sound like that in the control, then there's an issue with, there are other issues, and you need to get up, go out, have a listen to it, work it out, work backwards from there. And that's probably the most important lesson. And also that, you know, if something's a little bit dull or a little bit too bright or something, moving a microphone at half an inch or an inch more from the other side or changing the mic is a far better option than immediately jumping on the EQ and starting to EQ stuff and just putting phase shifting in all sorts of other crap into the signal chain, which you don't need to.
Yeah.
Fix it at the source.
As a producer, what qualities do you see as important to possess?
Patience, I suppose. No, not patience. I suppose I think what you're trying to do is make the record the artist wants to make. Sometimes you have to also deal with what the record company want the artist to make, and that's can quite often not be the same thing. From my point of view, I've always sided with the artist. And 9 times out of 10, it's ended up to be the right decision. And I think the thing is that the best records that I've worked on and the most successful records I've worked on have been records where the environment when we were making the records was fun. And everybody had a good time, and there was no stress or a little minimum, as least stress as you can have in any session. So it's about trying to create a good space, an environment for people to work in and comfortable and not impose. You're not making your record, you're making their record. And I think a lot of producers or some producers come across to the artist where make the artist feel like they're not making their own record. They're making the producer's record, and they should, there's a lot of politics and a lot of sort of, psychology, and I think a lot of, but also songcraft. I think, the working, I do a lot of pre-production, and I think it's about trust and confidence. If an artist has got to trust you, and you've got to have an honest atmosphere in the control room where people feel like they can say whatever they want and it's going to be accepted or whatever, but it's going to be accepted as being honest, and your replies are going to be honest, and then you get a creative environment. It's far quicker to try something than intellectualize it for half an hour or just say, no, I don't agree with you, you're not going to do it. Because a lot of times you try something and it actually is a good idea, or it spurns another good idea. So it's about creating an environment where everybody's comfortable and happy. People can be honest. They don't have to worry about what they're saying.
Yeah. Producing isn't always a natural progression for some engineers. Do you think it takes a particular personality type in order to make that successful progression from being an engineer to a producer?
Yeah, I do. I really do. I think I know a lot of engineers who don't want to produce, who
are just happy to track.
Yeah, or mix, or they don't want to deal with the politics of dealing with the artist. I know a lot of engineers and people like that who would rather not have to deal with the artists at all. And I think that they would make terrible producers because that's exactly why, um, that's what makes a good producer, is somebody who can deal with the artist and who likes dealing with artists and working with the artist. And a lot of mixers and engineers would rather the artist not be there, and they will make terrible producers. So no, I think it's not a natural progression, and a lot of people don't suit it at all.
What qualities do you look for in an assistant engineer or an engineer when you're producing?
Well, I always engineer everything I do myself anyway. So, but in an assistant, I suppose I look for never having to really ask them to do something. When I was an assistant or an engineer for people, if you're a part of the conversation that's going on in the room, or you're listening to, if you're aware of what's going on in the room, you'll hear people talking about, oh, well, maybe we're going to let's try an acoustic on that. You don't wait to be told by the producer, can you please go and set up an acoustic mic? You go and set up an acoustic mic and have it ready to go. Somebody who's actually part of the session and ahead of the game, so that the producer or whoever you're working for doesn't have to ask you to do anything. You're already doing it because you're participating in the recording. So that's what I ask. That's what I expect of them. And I expect them not to be on their phone when the red light's on, and just to be paying attention, to be part of the session. If they're going to be in the room and be working on the record, then I expect 100% concentration. That's really what I want. And I think that's what anybody wants, really, who's serious about making records.
What skills did you have to develop within yourself to make that jump from being an engineer to producer?
Well, I worked with such great producers as an engineer. I got to see how they interacted with the artist. I had to lose shyness. I was a bit shy at the beginning, but that's because I wasn't 100% confident in what I was doing. So also the good ones, the good records that I made were when the producer created that environment where everybody was happy and having a good time, and there was the air of honesty that people could feel free to say whatever they wanted and they would get an honest opinion. So I just had to learn to open up a little bit more, be a bit more confident, I suppose, really, in it. But that just came with the more records I did, the more confident I was in my own abilities to be able to. It's a big responsibility. If you're producing somebody's record, you walk away from it in 3 months. That's their life for the next year. They got to go out and tour it, promote it, or whatever. They're putting an enormous amount of responsibility in your hands, and you have to take that responsibility seriously and understand that that's what it means. It's a year or two of their life for these people. You can walk away. They've got to trust you that you are taking that responsibility. I like the feeling that people trust me enough to do that, to let me do that for them and take me into their world, into their little families, because bands are families, and work with them. I love it. I absolutely love it. It's fantastic. And when you come out the other end with a record you're proud of, it's one of the best feelings you can get.
What goes through your mind when you listen to a client's song for the first time? Are you going through it and identifying hooks that you could maybe bring out in the mix phase, identifying tempo changes that might work for the tune, alternative instrumentation?
All of the above. Sometimes it's an artist, like when the Baby Animals rang me up. I wanted to do their record 20 years ago when I first saw them, and it took I had to wait 20 years for them to ask me to do their record again. So it was a no-brainer for me, that one. I loved them 20 years ago, so I knew it was going to be great. Anyway, because I know them. I've worked with Dave on other projects when they, in the interim years. But so some bands I just knew that I was just honoured to be asked, and I loved it, and it was fantastic fun. New bands that I haven't heard of, then I listen to with all those things. Go through your mind. Do I like the song? Do I like the lyric? Do I think the tempo's right? And maybe it's a different way of doing it. I mean, all of those things go through your head, and sometimes you just go, oh, this is amazing. I don't need to do anything to it. I just need to record it. If you do know the artist, then it's whether you like them or not, I think, as an artist. So, yeah, all of the above, really.
How important is the tempo of the song?
Oh, tempo is crucial to me. I mean, I spend a lot of time in pre-production mucking around with different tempos, and sometimes it can really kill a song if the tempo is wrong. So it's something I spend a lot of time working on when we're in pre-production, making sure the tempo is right. Sometimes it can be wildly out rather than tinkering around with a couple of BPM this way or that way. It's, you say, well, let's just try it 10 BPM faster and see what happens. Half time it or something like that. And that suddenly opens up another approach to the song. So tempo is crucial. Tempo is absolutely crucial. It's like key is crucial as well. Sometimes the key can really kill a song if it's just not right for the singer and they're singing in a place that's not comfortable for them. Stretch out when they need to. So all those things are important, but tempo is crucial, and sequencing is crucial in that if you put two songs back to back and the tempos or the keys don't work right, they can absolutely kill both songs. So, and you swap them around or you do it different and it's like it's a different song. I mean, it's amazing how important that is. That sort of stuff is. And you hope that the first time they buy the record, they're going to listen to it once all the way through. And they may then only buy some tracks off it or whatever they do now. But, the hope is that the first time they hear it, at least they'll play it all the way through. And if you get it right, the sequencing right, then it makes a world of difference. And if you get it wrong, you can absolutely murder a record. So yeah.
What are some common arranging mistakes people are making in songwriting?
Pop stuff's there's a fairly well-trodden template for pop songs, and that hasn't changed in forever.
So like intro, verse, pre-chorus, verse two.
Bridge after the second chorus, breakdown chorus or breakdown verse after the bridge, I mean, and, you can tinker around with having an extra 2/4 bar here or there or, doing a few things like that. But generally, those sort of arrangements are pretty standard. So I can't imagine in my mind going, yeah, it'd be fine to have 9 choruses, one verse, a chorus, a bridge, and then 9 choruses. I mean, I don't get that at all. But it's because they're not really. It's not really a song. It's a dance track, or it's a vibe, or you know what I mean. It's not what I would. It's not the way I approach it. I approach songs as on a song-by-song basis, really, and you just do whatever's right for the song. And, we've done some stuff like on the last Baby Animals record where we just had a track that had, 5 verses and no real chorus. You got to approach each song on the way it wants to go, really. It was like the Pulp song that I did with Chris Thomas. That had, I don't know, 6 verses and didn't really have a chorus until the very, very end. And the chorus was really just a jam. It was like a big sort of one chord sort of, so,
This is the Common People track?
Yeah. So, I mean, try and approach each song on its merits and go with what's right for the song and how it was written, really.
How does your approach change when working with a brand new artist versus working with an established artist that you've never worked with before?
An established artist usually have a sound already, and all you try and do is make a good record that fits with what they've already established as being their sound and what they're who they are. Elton John's record, he has a sound, he has a style, and that's what he is. And you just try and, make the songs as interesting as you can and record them as well as you can and all of that kind of stuff. So, but with a brand new artist, you're trying to actually find a sound. And I love doing debut records. I mean, the most successful records I've had as a producer have been debut records for record bands like Zed and George, where we actually consolidate the sound that they developed as a live act and then turn that into a sound that would make them unique so that people could identify them. And I love that sort of voyage of discovery of trying to find the sound for a particular band. But whereas the established artists, you're just trying to be true to what they already are.
Yeah.
Unless they want to go complete left turn, and then that's another issue altogether. Usually then you have record company issues because they don't want them to do that. So
I remember a story told by Phil Ramone in Howard Massey's book Behind the Glass, where he talked about building a little effects unit for Billy Joel, integrated into his headphone mix for a bit of fun during tracking, and had buttons on it like echo plexes, phases and flanges, and each button was labelled Elvis just to make it a bit interesting for him. I mean, that's obviously an extreme case of getting the most out of a musician by turning the recording session into a bit of fun. What are some of the strategies you use to get the most out of an artist or band?
You have to get to know the person to find out what it is that's going to make it work for them. Figure out what it is that makes them tick, what button to press. So yeah, it's there. I don't have any sort of special tricks other than just trying to not go in with any preconceived ideas of what's going to work for a particular artist, and then try and figure it out as we go along, because sometimes you'll find that it's actually something you never would have thought of. Somebody might come across as being really extrovert and all sorts, a lot of bravado and all that kind of stuff, and you find that they're actually hiding the fact that they're incredibly insecure and that they need reassurance, or they need to be in the right sort of situation, or they need to not. Or some people need to be performing in front of other people to get the best out of them. Like when they know there are people in control listening to them, then they play better than when they're on their own. Whereas some people, they can't stand it. They want to be on their own, in their own little world. So it's like with bands, find out what the dynamic is within the band to find out how to get the best out of them. So, yeah, I think the thing is to not go in with any sort of preconceived tricks or ideas on how to get people to work, because it's kind of insulting, really, in that you're not prepared to actually learn, get to know the person.
What for you makes a great song, and what are some absolutely vital components it must have? You talked about a few of these already, which is the correct tempo, obviously, and the correct key.
Oh, for me, though, absolutely. I mean, they're sort of they're technical issues like, making sure you record it well. For me, I'm a totally lyric melody driven person. If I really don't like the lyric in a song, then there's nothing, no matter how groovy it is, I'm just not going to like that song, and there's nothing I can do about it. And for me, if I don't if I don't make a connection emotionally with a song, I don't know what do I do with it. I can make it bright, and I can make it have plenty of bass, and I can make it do this, and I can make it be loud. And the whole thing is to try and get an emotional connection with the listener. And if you don't like the song, then because the lyric is crap, or you don't connect with the lyric, then how do you go on from there? So for me, it's all about the lyric and the melody of the song. Sometimes there'll be just a fantastic melody and the lyric is kind of okay, it just needs a bit of work, or sometimes the lyric is fantastic and it's just the melody's a bit flat or something. But it's got to have those two things. It's got to have, but above all, if the lyric is rubbish, then I don't connect with it, because for me, making any music is very emotive and paints a picture for me. So I've got to make a connection with what the song's about and what the lyric is about, and then I know what to do with it. Then I know what pictures to paint and what colours to make it.
Do you mix visually? For instance, do you see the instruments in terms of them being tall, wide, or deep when you sit down to mix?
Yeah, for me, mixing is all about trying to create a three-dimensional picture. I find all music very visual for me. I mean, which is one of the funny things is when I first started mixing, I used to sit down and think, okay, what is this mixing thing I'm supposed to be doing now? Why is that different to what I've been doing for the last 6 weeks making the record? Because I've always, with the people I work with, and the way I've always done it is I kind of build the mix as you go. So it's kind of, then you get to the end, it's like, well, okay, well, now I'm supposed to mix it. What's the bloody difference, right? So in my mind, I was hearing it with that three-dimensional image. I was already imagining that. as I was going along. And so really it was once I discovered that what I needed to do is make that a reality. So everybody else heard, well, I was hearing it in my head. So it made my job a lot easier. But no, it's all very three-dimensional for me. It's trying to create a space that draws the listener in, and it's all very colourful, and music always creates images for me. So that's what I try and do when I mix. So create a three-dimensional little world that the song lives in.
How do you stay focused on the finer points of the mix while still keeping an objective eye?
Well, that's always the toughie, I mean, I always find that my best work is the first hour or two, and then after that, it's a matter of trying to not go backwards. What I do now is I move on rather than blabbering over something, because you can get so bogged down in the finer points that really have no bearing on whether somebody's going to like the song or not. They'll put the song on and they'll listen to, 10 bars of it and go, I don't really like that song. And that's it. And you go, but I've spent, my blood, sweat and tears and that little bit at the end where it's just that perfect. And people just go, I don't really like the song, so it was all a waste of time, really. So the finer points really are satisfying yourself and the musicians and the artists that they've got all the little bits that they wanted to hear across, but really the audience makes a decision brutally, within a very short space of time, and they don't really hear all that stuff. They just either, yes, I like it, or no, I don't like it, but on very basic sort of terms. All of those finer things are, if you do get somebody to really like the song, I like to think that there are lots of things that they can, when they listen to it over and over again, they'll discover new things in the song. They're the things that I try and spend the last couple of hours in when I'm mixing, but I find the first couple of hours, that's when I really either nail it or don't nail it. And then it's about trying not to go backwards and use that extra time, if you're given it, to create little special moments that you can, that somebody does get into listening to the song, that gives them things to discover the more they listen to it.
Are there any general or habitual approaches you take to your mixes? And if so, would you be willing to share some of these?
It really is always driven by the song. I mean, some songs are beat driven and some songs are top line driven, and so it really depends on the nature of the song. So whether I approach it by getting the groove happening first and then put the vocal in over the top of that, or whether I get the vocal right and then bring, it depends on which way it works. That's when I'm mixing something that I haven't recorded. When I've recorded it and produced it, I built the mix up from the beginning. So it's never going to be that much different from where I'm at when I finish recording it. I just make it, as I say, add all of the three-dimensionality to it that I've been hearing in my head and make that a reality. Because you can't often do that when you're tracking, because it's not a good environment to be in when you're recording a lot of the time, to be in that kind of 3D world, and also with the reduced dynamic range which you need when you're mixing. But when I'm mixing something that I haven't recorded, then I try and find out what's driving the song. Whether it's the groove that is really the thing that's the song's built around, or whether it's a particular hook somewhere. I try and find what is the thing in the song that makes it work, and then build around that. Try and get rid of superfluous stuff. That's the other thing I try and do a lot of. Certainly not with the stuff I've done, because I've tried to do that right from the beginning, but stuff that I'm given, when I get a file FTP'd to me and it's got 64 tracks, then, I go into cull mode and try and find out what really is needed and what's not needed, and get rid of it. And you find that, you can probably get rid of half of those tracks and you'd still be fine, Do
you find the more tracks, the smaller it sounds, as opposed to having, quite a small number of tracks?
Definitely. I think, the endless layering, you end up getting smaller and smaller and smaller. You lose the dynamics, and that's usually because the track has been built up from scratch, from bit by bit. It's been layer upon layer, and, it gets to a point where you just start going backwards. And then you keep adding more things to try and get that dynamic back, and it's a waste of time. And when I've got a track like that, which I just had recently, I just had a track, this was this 12 snare drum track.
All right, yeah.
It was 12 snare drums, 4 bass drums, 8 hi-hat tracks, all stereo because it was Logic. It was ridiculous. And there were 6 scrap tracks and 12 snare drums. So what I did was I thought, well, this is ridiculous. I just soloed the lead vocal and thought I'll have to bounce some of this stuff down and just sort of find what's going on. I got rid of all the snare drums and just found one decent snare drum. So I bounced it down. And when I was bouncing it down, I just had the vocal and the claps soloed. And I thought, wow, this is the best the song has sounded to me ever. Since, I've been working on it for hours, finding my way through the fog. And when I was bouncing the claps down, I had just had the lead vocal and the claps soloed, and it was the first time I went, this is a really cool song. I actually could hear the lyric, and the melody was really cool because it wasn't getting swamped by all of these pads, which all had different melodies in them. It just confused the actual basic melody of the song. And it was the best it sounded. So I rewrote the bass drum part because it was 3 bass drums playing all different parts. So I just rewrote the bass drum part, got the best sample, put in a new bass drum part, and I had the claps and added the lead vocal, and then just added lead vocal in, and then added the BVs in, and then there was a really cool guitar track I found out of the 10 guitar tracks, and it ended up having, I don't know, maybe 16 tracks all up, and it sounded fantastic. I sent it back to the artists, and they went, wow, this is fantastic, and and it was about the 10th different version of this song they'd had. The song itself, the lyric and the melody stood up perfectly fine with just a backbeat.
It didn't need all that other production.
Didn't need any of it. And it was actually, ruining the song. Because a lot of times when I start producing a track, I can kind of hear what it's going to sound like finished already. At the end, I've got to actually translate that into an audible reality for everybody else. But often I get quite a good flash of what I imagine the song going to sound like in the end. And that's what I try and build towards.
What defines depth to you, and what are some of the ways you go about achieving that depth in the box?
There's nothing beats a real 3-dimensional space. I mean, Altiverb and things like that are not too bad, but I find actually the best things in Altiverb are the plate simulators and the chambers simulations, and then the simulations of the actual chambers from the studios, and also where you want things to be in the mix.
You're talking about a lack of top end or high end?
No, I'm talking about where you place things, where something is in the 3-dimensional space. I've always mixed sort of quite stereo. For a long time, that was great because, everybody had pretty good hi-fis and they had turntables at home, and people used to set them up really good. And then the boombox era sort of came along and everything was kind of mono. And now 90% of people are listening to their music on earbuds. So actually the way I like to mix has sort of come back into fashion they're actually hearing it in the stereo image. I'm loving the fact that people are listening to it on headphones now all the time, because a lot of my mixes out of the boombox never really worked because they were kind of mono. They were too spacious, and so they tended to sound not loud enough, or, they didn't really work as well. It didn't come across what I was trying to get across. The Clear Mountain stuff, like the Roxy Music tracks, you listen to them on a boombox and they sound fucking awful. But because they were mixed to be listened to on a record player, in stereo.
Yeah.
So I'm glad the boombox is over, and it's the only good thing about the sort of modern way people listening to music is that they're actually listening to it in stereo now. It's great. It brings back that whole 3-dimensionality thing, which I love doing with my mixing. I always try and create a really 3-dimensional space.
Can you list a few practical techniques for achieving commercial loudness without making a song brittle or harsh, which is something a lot of home studio people struggle with.
In the home studio, people, there are too many easy plugins like, these maximizers and things, and people just slam it through those. And because it sounds really loud, that they, in their minds, that's good. And loud is not good. Just because it's loud doesn't mean it's good. And a lot of them, they just overload the buses, even though they may not be showing red. If you have, 60 tracks all going into 2 buses, then going into a maximizer, you've got no headroom at all, and it's all being squished, and you lose an enormous amount of data. It's being lost. I take everything and turn the whole lot down. I bring, whenever I get a mix, I just get all the faders and I bring them all down to -10, and I start there with everything down at -10, and then I bus 4 or 5 stereo buses, one for all the beats and one for the guitars, say, and one for the keyboards, and I break things up into buses and then I bus those buses to a mix bus, which is where I use a mix limiter, or I send that out to my analog box, and I also send vocals and basses and things like that out through outputs and reprint them and stuff like that if it's all been done in the box. I do it like that, and then I get it mastered properly, and the guy who I master always runs it through half-inch. That adds another whole nice level of harmonic distortion to everything and tightens up the bottom end. I think the problem with a lot of people mixing in the box now is that they don't actually use their ears. They have feel-good buttons that they press, and it suddenly sounds louder and bigger. But in hindsight, they'll look back and they'll find out that it's not great.
When is a mix finished?
I don't know. I think it takes a long time to learn when a mix is finished. It takes a long time to know when to stop. I tend to get to a point where I think it's almost there, and so to stop going backwards. Once I feel like maybe I'm going backwards, I stop instead of going on. And then I come and listen to it the next day, or come back to it in an hour or so, or after I've listened to another song, or do something else. But because then you find that the things that you might have been worried about an hour before, you can't remember what they were, and they don't bother you anymore. So that's when you are kind of disappearing down the down the big black hole. Sometimes you just know when it's just you finish it, and you've got a reaction. Your hairs have stood up, or even if it's not perfect, and there may be a few things that are a bit hairy or something. But if a song ever makes me get that thing, I go, that's it, print it.
Yeah, cool.
It's done, because that's the ultimate thing you want to do, is get it to instill an emotional reaction from you. And as soon as that happens to me, then it's finished. Don't touch it. Print it, walk away before you ruin it.
So moving on to the future, you've had an amazing career. What drives you on? And where do you see yourself in 10 years? Is there anyone in particular who you'd still love to work with in the studio?
Oh, well, I just hope to still be making records. I mean, that's my, if I could be making records till I drop dead, that would be suit me fine. I feel I'm incredibly honoured and privileged to still be doing it at my age now. It's hard to compete against the new kids on the block. I think the people that I built relationships with up over the last 30 years are people that, like what I do, and will still hopefully keep coming back and get me to work with them, because it's about, as I said, a lot of it is about trust and working with them again, because you enjoyed working with them and they enjoyed working with you, and they feel comfortable about it. So there's that. I mean, I like doing new stuff. I mean, I'm starting to do a whole heap of hip-hop stuff now because of this Indigenous people that I'm working with, and I'm actually loving it. I'm really loving it. I mean, I always liked the beat part of hip-hop. I just wasn't that fussed with the gangster rap kind of stuff. Listening to people talk about themselves narcissistically, as they tended to be. Now I'm working with stuff where this Indigenous stuff where the lyrics have moved me to tears. I mean, it's the one thing you want in music is honesty in the performance, and And so this stuff is really, honest, and it's really moving, and I love it. And the beats and the music are fantastic fun to mix. They're great. I've blown up both my Genelecs in the last couple of weeks. But it's fun. It's really fun. So keep working and keep having fun and making records.
What changes would you like to see in the future in the music industry?
Oh, I would really, really like radio to not be so commercially driven, because it means that it's very, very difficult for anybody to get in a look in other than the majors. And the majors are really not doing anything for artist development anymore. So that's all coming from the independents, and the independents just don't get a look in at radio at all, because it's totally driven by the advertising dollar, and I think it's a real shame. So what I would like to see is changes to the rules that govern local content when it's played. I drive home from the studio and I hear nothing but Australian music from midnight to dawn on my way home from the studio, because they're fulfilling their commitment to play a certain amount of percentage of Australian material. And they're not even playing new stuff. They're playing stuff that was, 20 years old, and they're playing at 2 a.m. So, and they're just playing whatever the majors, the Sonys and the Universals and that want to sell in prime time. Especially in Australia, they haven't had to invest any money in it other than advertising. So I'd like to see changes in things like that, which would allow more local content into the radio. So I think without radio, people don't know you've made a record. It's very hard to get to your audience. I mean, social media has changed that to a vast degree, but I think still radio support is crucial. And also, while I'm at it, on changes, I'd like people to remember, I think people, the general public, is getting sick of the sound of records at the moment. They sound crap compared to what they used to sound like. The sound quality has just consistently gone downhill since vinyl went. I think it's nice to see that some of that's coming back. Some people are starting to release stuff on vinyl again. People are actually investing in decent hi-fis. They've got good hi-fis in their cars now. The quality, I think it'd be nice to get back to some good, the quality of stuff. I'd like radio stations to not play MP3s for starters.
There's been a shift in the culture of music, as you were saying, with so many large studios shutting down and gear becoming more and more affordable and higher in quality. And the trend seems to be that most people will be recording themselves in the future with very high quality and affordable gear. Is that how you see it playing out?
It is, but I think there's nothing... It is, but even though people are making records at home, I do think that... I suppose this is, me just justifying my own job, but I think that there is still a role for a producer in trying to get the best out of an artist, or trying to work with a band to get the best out of a band. I think that there's nothing wrong with accumulated knowledge being passed on, and that it shouldn't be seen as, oh, well, that's all old school, and the isolation of people into being on their own, in making their own records by themselves. And one of the great things about music is the interplay between people and the interaction between different musicians. And when people are making everything by themselves in a box, it becomes very one-dimensional, and I think that's a bad thing. Just that whole thing of creating a space that allows a record to go to a place that you didn't imagine.
We both talked about the flaws in the education system privately when it comes to the school mentality of learning how to engineer, where engineering students are not necessarily getting the valuable experience that they'd be getting from working in a real studio. So I was wondering if you were given the opportunity to shape the next generation of music producers or engineers in the classroom, what would your first day lesson plan be? Would you start recording from the outset and just
No, I learnt, like I think most the people of my generation learnt, by sitting in the back of the room, plugging things in for people and making cups of tea and watching how other people were making records, and learning that way, and also coming up through doing front of house or being a musician, thinking that you can go and spend 6 weeks or whatever at some school and learn how to become a music producer or an engineer is just a farce. It's just a farce. It takes years of understanding and knowledge and exposure to the culture and what music's really about and all of the rest of it and how it's done and the philosophies and all those things. And I think that comes from exposure to working with people who have actually done it or being in that environment. My advice to people who want to get into it is always to use the money they would spend on one of those courses and put that in the bank and support themselves and go and work for a band. And do front of house or be a guitar tech or go and work for a studio and say you make cups of tea for them for a year for nothing. I think that's how you learn, because it's a much more complicated thing than can be taught from a textbook. I mean, just knowing how a compressor works, it's got no bearing on how you would use it musically. You need to see it work and understand why it would work and understand what you would do with it. And also 80% of making records is psychology, is the process of creating the environment, working with the artist and getting the trust and all those other things that go into making records. Technology is a tool and you should try and get the best tools you can and learn how to use them but make them as invisible as possible. The process is about making music, not about
adding 50 hertz.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell us about your new channel strip that you're putting together with a colleague.
Yeah, this is it's a thing called The Prodigal. I'm putting it together with a guy called Andy Zickler, who I met when I was doing front of house. He's like one of these guys that's just a genius at everything. And we started talking about the fact that I'm having to work at home a lot more because and this plays into the same thing, the conversation I had with Paula Jones about Live, Work, Loud. How do you work at home and make it still sound good? What would be great is to have a really great stereo package that has everything in it you need. It's basically a Neve preamp, an 1176, a 902 de-esser, a filter section, and a stereo box, all beautifully made, and it's a real high-end analog strip, and it sounds absolutely gorgeous. And we A-bit all the different transformers and different chips and found the right frequency response that we wanted, and yeah, it's gorgeous. It's really, really nice. And, I just basically said, these are my favourite bits of gear and I use in the studio. What would be great is to have 2 channels of this at home, one box. And, 6 months later he came back with a design and we've been R&Ding it since then. And you can use it on the recording side and you can use it on the mixing side. I use it as a couple of buses on my outputs and reprocess stuff with it. And then I use it as a mix limiter at the end. Plus I've used it on every record that I've recorded in the last couple of years while we've been R&Ding it, on every possible kind of instrument. Cool. It's a beautiful box. Plus it's got the monitoring section, because a lot of the problems with a lot of us working at home, quite often, say if you're doing pre-production, you might be taking your LE out and you've got the dreaded latency issue. Well, this has got a section where, you can feed in the original signal so you don't have the latency issue. It's got a proper monitoring section in it, so you don't need to have then another box to plug all your, if say you want a cassette ADAT player, or you put your iPhone into it, or you want to have another set of speakers or something like that. So it's got basically a whole monitoring section sort of based around the thing like a big knob or something like that. So you've got all of that interactive busing and stuff as well. So really what you do is you put this box on the table and you put your laptop on the top of it and you plug in your self-powered speakers and away you go. You got a studio. I always try and track in a big studio, but then budgets and things, the record companies aren't going to pay $1,000 a day for you to do a vocal anymore. So I go and rent a house or a flat or something and I take the box, do the vocal that way.
When can we expect to see it on the market?
We're hoping to have it available mid this year. Hopefully come to fruition about the same time as we get the live work thing going. So because we will probably provide one of those with each of the rooms, because basically it's a standalone box which gives you everything you need. all your favourite bits of gear that you might have in a recording chain in one box.
I've got some viewer questions for you. Larry Flynn asks, how do you determine what level to record at in order to obtain the optimal signal to noise ratio?
I mean, are we talking digital or analog? Because, I mean,
I'd say we'd be talking digital.
yeah, I mean, with digital, I mean, I don't go with this whole thing that that you get more quality the louder it is, you know, because with the jazz stuff, I have to leave so much headroom that, you know, some points it may not be metering at all. Yeah. And then other points it will be one light off going red. And I have never noticed any difference in the quality. And I've done lots of these records where they go down to the quietest sounds and then this, you know, how loud a trumpet can be. I don't think that there's any advantage to recording loud. If you've got a clean signal path going in, then I think it's far more important to make sure that you don't overload. So whereas with analog, it was, you know, you had to have a certain level to get above the inherent hiss that you have in analog technology. Analog technology has a noise floor that's a lot higher than digital technology, and then you had tape hiss on top of that, all that kind of stuff. So you used to record quite a fair bit hotter if you were going analog, just to get a good signal to noise ratio. But you basically start by getting a good signal level at the front end into your mic pre, and then work from there.
Emma Saunders, what's the best way to learn mixing? Very open-ended question.
Yeah, very open-ended question. But well, see, that's what I was saying. I remember vividly going, what is this thing called mixing? You know, you finished a record and you'd done all the tracking and it sounded fantastic and you were loving it, and then you know you had 2 weeks to mix it, and I remember thinking, okay, well, what do I do now? I mean, I already love it. It sounds great. Then it was I was realizing that there were things about the sound that I was already hearing in my mind that were different to what it was actually sounding like in reality.
Okay.
Because I'd grown up with the song from the beginning, I needed to be able to translate that so other people could hear it, you know. I think if I was to sort of sum it up in a conceptual way, it's about trying to get the best out of a song. What is the thing that makes the song good, and then try and make that stand out, embellish that, and create a nice palette for that song to sit on. You know, give it a colour, give it a personality.
The last question comes from YouTube Hound 69. He asks, what's the best way to sequence / master an album and burn it to CD using Pro Tools?
Well, I wouldn't do it using Pro Tools. I do my sequencing. I make a production master in Pro Tools where I spend a lot of time sequencing the record to make sure I have the right tempos and key shifts and don't have one horrible key, you know, terrible key changes or tempo changes. Spend a lot of time mucking around with that. And I do that in Pro Tools, then send it off to mastering and get it mastered properly, because I think all of these feel-good mastering plugins are just that. They are things that just make it sound louder, which tricks you into thinking it sounds better, and they're not really. And then, you know, a lot of actual mastering guys do that as well. They just make it sound louder and brighter and think that that's what you want. Whereas good mastering guys actually are musical, to think about the song and what's best for the song. And loudness isn't everything. And, you know, just because it's loud doesn't mean it's good.
And one last question from me.
Yep.
A very difficult question. What is the secret to the perfect cup of tea?
Oh, the perfect cup of tea. Well, the perfect cup of tea is not too much milk, and never put the sugar in. Never put anything in with the tea bag. You put the tea bag in with the boiling hot water, and then when you got the right colour, then you add the sugar and the milk, and only a tiny bit of milk. That's it.
David, thanks for your time.
It's a pleasure, man, and thanks for asking. I'm flattered that anybody's interested to know what I have to say. And I hope I didn't waffle on too much, but, you know, all I can say is that anybody out there making music, you know, it's a wonderful, you know, I feel incredibly privileged to still be able to do it, and I've actually been able to make a career out of it that's lasted this long, and I'm humbled by it. So good luck to all of your listeners and with their records.
Thanks for your time.
No worries.
If you have any questions, comments or ideas for new video tutorials, please email me at yamahadrums2009@hotmail.com. And please subscribe to remain informed of video updates. Until next time, happy mixing.